Ever wonder where the LeBron's not clutch, or Kevin Durant's the greatest player of our generation takes come from? Or my personal favorite, Stephen Curry is a frontrunner and lucks his way into rings? Well, for the most part, look no further than Fox Network's Skip Bayless and his media empire he built off lying, hyperbole, and an unrivaled commitment to his entertainment craft. Born John Edward Bayless II, legally changed to Skip Bayless in his adulthood, is an American sports commentator and television personality. Nowadays, you'll most likely know him from his daily sports talk show on the Fox network called Undisputed. However, people that have been around the game a while know his roots in ESPN's First Take show with his former co-host Stephen A. Smith. Skip is notorious for his takes that reach levels of blasphemy, most frequently about the biggest stars in their respective games. LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Stephen Curry, you get the idea. So, how did a sports personality which is near unanimously discredited and made fun of become arguably the most polarizing sports television personality of all time? Well, it has a lot to do with his dedication to his craft and profession, smart business decisions, and willingness to die on the hill for his takes, blasphemous or not. To see how Skip summited the sports media mountain, it's important that we trace back his beginnings and see where his dedication for his craft and smart business acumen was molded. Born in Oklahoma City in 1951, Skip grew up with both of his parents and two siblings, a brother and a sister, but his world revolved around sports predominantly. At an early age, Skip was thrust into his family's restaurant named the Hickory House. Although, Skip didn't want to follow his father's footsteps into the food world, unlike his brother Rick Bayless, who went on to be a Michelin star chef and restaurateur. Instead, his first and only love was sports. Initially, Skip cared more about participating in sports rather than covering them. That being said, we all remember those Jalen Rose and Richard Sherman segments on First Take. Even so, Skip claims he was an Athlete of the Year in Oklahoma, an MVP of a big dual-state basketball camp, and lettered in baseball as a high school sophomore, which he assured was no small feat at his school. Although, it would be his sophomore English teacher who would usher him into the world of journalism after he submitted a biography about former New York Giants quarterback Y.A. Tittle for a first-day assignment book report. Soon after, Skip would become the primary sports columnist for his school paper in his junior and senior years. A funny side note about this, Skip was even quoted as saying he slammed his high school baseball team that he played for in a sports column, and it just sounds like the most Skip Bayless thing ever. Also, I believe the location was so paramount for Skip's rise to relative stardom because of his upbringing. As an Oklahomian myself, you feel so out of touch with the rest of the world for the most part, and maybe being boxed in with his parents' business and while not having the greatest home life, while I won't touch on that here, but Skip detailed it himself a few times, is what motivated him to place himself in the limelight for the extent of his career. In an attempt to separate himself from a rough childhood and small potato dreams of Oklahoma, Skip accepted a scholarship to attend Vanderbilt University with a major of English and history. At this point, Skip was a highly touted journalism prospect, as stupid as that sounds, with the Grantland Rice Scholarship, graduating cum laude, positions as sports editor and sports director at Vanderbilt, plus an internship under sports editor Frank Boggs at the Daily Oklahoman upon his graduation. Because of that, immediately after graduating, Skip had a position lined up for the Miami Herald, where he would write sports columns for a couple of years thereafter. He leveraged that position to an opportunity with the LA Times, where he would cover the Dodgers, Rams, and Lakers. Unfortunately for Skip, he would be too late for Weston Wilt's run and too early for Kareem and Magic's, but LA was still the city of stars, even then. Bayless then moved on to the Dallas Morning News as his lead sports columnist, culminating in a position with the Dallas Times-Herald. During this time, Skip was voted Sports Writer of the Year by the National Sportscasters and Sports Writers Association in 1979, 1984, and 1986. This would also be the time that Skip grew great affinity for the Cowboys franchise, which would be a large part of his shtick as a television personality. Also, this would be the time where Skip began to transition out of written media as a whole, with his radio starting up in 1994 on the Dallas radio station KLIF. The Skip Bayless Show ran from 6 to 9 a.m. weekdays from 94 to 96, then was bought out as Skip transitioned to featuring on ESPN's programming like the Fabulous Sports Babe. I'd argue that Skip's favorite time as a writer came in his Dallas stint, however. He stayed for 17 years and covered the great Dallas team spearheaded by the likes of Tom Landry and Barry Switzer. It was also in this time that Bayless began to see the value in the drama side of sports, with his most memorable moments in Dallas deriving from his book releases like The Boys, the untold story of the Dallas Cowboys season on the edge, or following the third Cowboys Super Bowl win in 4 seasons. Bayless wrote a third book about the Cowboys, Hellbent: The Crazy Truth About the Win or Else Dallas Cowboys. After his successful stint though, Skip turned to cover his NBA GOAT, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, at the Chicago Tribune to cover what would turn out to be his final year with the Chicago Bulls in 1998. Yet again, Skip placed himself in the epicenter of the sports world at that moment, but something tells me Skip was sure Jordan wouldn't retire, seeing as Skip would leave 3 years after Jordan's second retirement in 2001. Admittedly, his tenure there was successful and garnered a few awards with more radio appearances. It will also refine what would become his hot take formula during this time with pieces like Poor Scotty, He's in Michael's MVP way, 4 games before the Game 6 of the 98 finals, or No Doubt Now, the Chicago Bulls will all be back, which he released the day they won their 6th ring, and second three-peat. Little did he know, am I right? It would be in 2004 that Skip would really come into form after all those years materializing his craft in legitimate sports reporting before he would get into what he would truly be known for, television. Even so, he had a lengthy experience on TV as an ESPN panelist on NFL Prime Mondays, Knights of the Round Table, and the Sports Reporters segments since 1989. But in 2004, ESPN hired Skip onto its full-time staff to participate in segments in a daily debate on ESPN2's Cold Pizza Show, as well as occasionally writing columns. Skip's most memorable moment from this stint came from his debate with Allen Iverson about his practice comments and work ethic. Allen Iverson was even quoted as saying, "Skip motivates me more than anybody else on the planet." This would be a sneak peek of what Skip would bring into the fold much more in the future, challenging athletes personally, enough to get their attention. This show would evolve into what we know as First Take today, with Stephen A. Smith joining the fold in 2012. This is when Skip's career and fame would take their largest leap, arguably. In this time, his LeBron takes and subsequent rivalry was formed, Richard Sherman and Jalen Rose beefs would ensue, and Stephen A. and Skip's screaming debates would soon become the backdrop of millions of homes across America. This is the era we most know Skip for. I'll save most of the details for the latter part of the video, because much of what is interesting about this part of his career are his takes, so buckle up for that. Of course, after a historic run at the peak of sports media mountain, Skip would begin the tidal wave that would be the resurgence of Fox Sports, with his record-setting contract to join forces with NFL Hall of Famer Shannon Sharpe to debate daily on their show Undisputed. He would then move back to where it all started for him in LA for his new show, and as we've witnessed, LA sports prominence has risen greatly since 2016 with championships from the Dodgers, Lakers, and Rams. Skip's center of it all business decisions may have been a case of right place, right time, but sometimes you gotta give credit where it's due. Skip did it the long way and the right way, and was able to cover the most prominent sports programs in the world during his career. As I said, I know I just largely touched on all of Skip's former positions, but I really want to highlight how Skip placed himself in the right place at the right time in nearly every aspect of the phrase. With such a fast-paced, revolving world like sports news, it is ever increasingly important to be in the limelight at all times. This can come in a multitude of factors, or even a combination of them, with talking about the right narrative, or the right sport, or the right team, even down to the right player. This sentiment is heightened even more when considering being in the right town, which I believe Skip largely attempted to do throughout his career, at least when it mattered. I say all that to say that Skip has earned his position in his respective game. I think it's easy for people to forget what all Skip has done in his field, but the man is about as accomplished as you can be in sports media. With multiple awards, record-setting contracts, and top-tier job positions, it's no wonder where Skip's courage of his conviction comes from. But in that same vein, it explains a lot where the confidence in his outlandish takes comes from as well. Skip's current standing in sports media is pretty funny, and sad at the same time. It basically is a revolving door of Skip's deluded takes that is met with harsh and brazen criticism as people wonder why Skip is even afforded the opportunity to spew these heinous takes in the first place. Well, 2 notes on that. Starting with the most important one, I don't think people have realized yet that Skip has reduced his takes to a shtick at this point. As the saying goes, all publicity is good publicity. So as people wonder why Skip still has a large standing in the sports television world, hundreds of thousands watch the show waiting for the easy rebuttal moment either at the hands of themselves in the comment section or his co-host Shannon Sharpe. And 2, Skip will die on the hill for any of his takes, which he carefully crafts to maximize drama and choose the most polarizing target, whether the take's crazy or not. Regardless, it can all be chalked up to engagement and is the main reason Skip has manipulated the game for himself to remain arguably the largest pool in the sports media world. To start off, I want to recount Skip's long history of crazy takes, from Tim Tebow being better than Aaron Rodgers, LeBron being a choke artist and overrated, promises of Johnny Manziel and Baker Mayfield excellency, Steph's rings not counting, to McGregor winning the fight against Floyd. Skip obviously has a long history of polarizing, dramatic, scorching hot takes, or rather, freezing cold. Let's dive into Skip's formula for his takes and see if we can find out what makes him so damn polarizing to the point where he lost the majority of his credit in sports analysis, but remains the largest celebrity in his field. Another key part of his allure is the choice of who to criticize. The greater the star, the bigger the name, means more eyes on Skip's take. So naturally, like most other sports outlets, Skip gravitates to the biggest stars to make his strongest takes. For example, his stances against LeBron or Steph, or his love for Tebow, Brady, and Baker. Sure, this matters because the biggest names will get the most attention, but also Skip chooses his targets wisely and how they'll react to the criticism too. Take his feud with Richard Sherman, for example. Skip doesn't shy away from any comment and welcomes all players who doesn't like what he has to say about them onto the show. Well, that ingratiates himself even more into the sports world, as he's become one of the top names in sports media not only to fans, but to players too. See, in sports media, there's a large respect for players in the game, and the vast majority of journalists and TV personalities, they stay far away from insulting players to the point where they'll publicly come at you. But Skip was different in that sense. He welcomed the smoke, whether he was being stupid or not. As I mentioned before, Allen Iverson was quoted as saying, "Skip motivates me more than anybody else on the planet," and he feuded with Chris Bosh after nicknaming him Bosh Spice for his play with the Heat. Even when a player like Bosh, who brought the issue to Skip himself on first take and addressed it like an adult, Skip stares him dead in the face, takes a long, deep breath, and goes on a 5-minute tirade on how the nickname is deserved because of Bosch's soft play. Which takes us into the next couple parts of Skip's process with hot takes. Skip's antics didn't only catch players' attention though, with Mark Cuban even coming on first take to confront him for analyzing the game with no knowledge of what a zone defense is. And throughout it all, Skip never wavered or admitted defeat. He truly has a blind conscience. This is because Skip knows he's not a sports expert and instead relies on his personality and anecdotal arguments to pull the audience in. Because of that though, the common sports fan can relate to him. Sure, as an educated basketball fan, you may want to argue about the intricacies of drop screens, pin downs, different sets or whatever, but Skip knows the average fan cares more about the GOAT argument than all of that, right or wrong. It's one thing to choose the right person to talk about as a TV sports host, but it's a whole another thing to be the right messenger as well. And Skip plays that role to perfection. Skip is the epitome of the person you love to hate. His job isn't to be likable, but rather to be entertaining. And he sure is damn entertaining. There are people you hate, then there are people you love to hate. And that's the category Skip falls in. As a small town kid who worked his way up the sports media totem pole and goes off at 3 hours of sleep a day and runs 2 miles each night at 2 a.m., can really come off as a committed entertainer. And people can get behind that, even if it's just to hate on what he has to say. Now for the main part of his allure, Skip's hot takes. It can be said Skip is actually a large reason for the prominence of hot take culture in media today. To begin, Skip seemingly loves going against the grain with his takes. This gives him the polarization he needs from the audience, but the crazy part is that he believes his takes too. Like he truly believes LeBron James is not a top 8 player of all time in basketball, or KD remains the best player in the league even though he got swept in the first round. Things like that. By placing himself in the minority, Skip assures that there will be a metaphorical, screaming mob with fire pitchforks waiting for his every word, as well as dominating a niche that hasn't been taken advantage of yet, like LeBron's haters or Tebow's supporters. In doing so, with such big stars like LeBron or Aaron Rodgers, they kinda lack that spokesperson or critic to represent their haters. Skip kinda became that. After identifying the minority position on their respective game's biggest stars, Skip then pushes whatever moderate take he's had to the absolute limit to further make his take as polarizing as possible, and, just my theory, as easily refuted as possible, promoting interaction with said take. So, Skip will identify a take that for the most part he is in the minority in, and then Skip uses abundance of anecdotal evidence, such as Baker Mayfield's 11-game run with 1 playoff win, or KD's 2 championship years and his closeout game where his big toe was on the line, or how he points to a specific section in games, like for example if LeBron missed a late game free throw, but overall had 32, 10, and 11 stat line. Even so, Skip would call it a disappointment, just to stick to his ludicrous takes. And no matter what evidence is brought before him, what person debates him, or any other factors, Skip will never turn his back on the take unless he comes to that conclusion himself. A good example of this, I think, is his stance on the 2016 finals. He swears up and down that Steph choked away this finals and Draymond had to run to his car and cry on the phone to KD to get him to come. And because of that, Durant had to quote unquote save his legacy by joining forces with Golden State for the next 3 years. However, the biggest hole in the argument is Durant, in that same playoff run no less, lost a 3-1 lead himself to Steph before joining him the following offseason, which, by using simple logic, would mean at the very least, Durant would also have saved his legacy by joining the Warriors, right? But if you were to bring this point up to Skip though, he just assure you that Durant's 3-1 comeback loss to Steph can be easily attributed to Russell Westbrook's poor play. Of course, this is just him refuting anything that doesn't align with his own cherry-picked arguments, a game of cat and mouse if you will. In conclusion, Skip is just as committed to entertaining as he is committed to not turning his back on borderline insane takes. And apparently people cannot get enough of it, regardless of how clearly wrong it is. As we wrap up, we've gone over how Skip dedicated himself to his craft over his near 50-year career, how he benefited from smart business dealings to cover the nation's most popular teams, and how that all translated into him becoming the highest paid sports TV personality in the United States. Part of me is sad to see the kind of formulaic process Skip has rendered himself to, but I know with age, years of experience, and simply just going off what gets most interaction, it's really no surprise Skip lacks some of the nuance people want in their sports analysis. That being said, Skip still turned a somewhat mundane life in the dreariness of Oklahoma into an incredibly accomplished career. It just so happened that Skip's peak of fame was built on his blasphemous hot takes and refusal to back off them under any circumstance. What do you think? Do you think Skip's sheer blind commitment to clearly wrong takes just plainly discredits him and the Fox Sports Network? Or do you think it makes for good entertainment? Personally, I enjoy seeing Shannon, or formerly Stephen A., lose their minds at Skip's unbelievably biased takes, especially considering that I'm a fan of Aaron Rodgers and Stephen Curry. On the other hand though, I also enjoyed watching the lengths Skip would go to defend his crazy takes. But I also understand that I'm not watching Undisputed or First Take for real basketball or football analysis. I think that's the source of the majority who dislike Skip. I also don't think it's irrational to want the highest paid sports TV personality to not be reduced to a shtick when it comes to his most important sports takes. That being said, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and you should let me know what yours is down below. This video was made by Underdog. Peace. Hey guys, just wanted to talk to you about a couple things after the video. Sorry if I sound sick, I caught something over the weekend. But anyways, I just wanted to talk about how I'm going to be shifting over my sports content to a more focused channel where you can find exclusively like football and basketball stuff from me. I'm not doing it yet. I'm waiting for the start of the football season to fully make that shift over. But if you guys like this type of content, if you could go ahead and subscribe to it, that would really mean a lot to me. And we're going to keep this channel kind of more focused around culture topics like music, video games, film, and TV. But yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that, and I appreciate if you check the video out. Please leave a like and subscribe. And yeah, that's it from me. Peace.